Are Apple's new iGadgets enough to satisfy the iFaithful?
And is the tech giant on a winner with Apple TV Plus and Apple Arcade? Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Casa Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market. Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as always by Alex Kidman, a man whose mind, body, and spirit are currently spread across 3 time zones as he fights off his EFA jet lag from Berlin while staying up all night in Sydney to cover Apple's events in California. Alex, are you still with us?
Ein Apples Vi Pro Kudasai. No, wait. What was the question?
Yeah, Mum, we'll get through it. Just try and stay awake, man. This week, we're joined by a new guest, freelance journalist Alice Clarke, a regular contributor to the Sydney Morning Herald and the Herald Sun and other Australian publications. Alice is joining us via the Vertical Hold satellite direct from Apple's iPhone event in California. Alice, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be here.
Have you had much more sleep than Alex?
Look, I got into California about 30 hours ago, and I've had maybe 3 hours sleep. So I know I am somewhere, but where? Who knows?
All right, so if at least
we'll muddle through this together.
If at least 2 of us can be awake at any one time during this podcast, we should be fine.
Perhaps we just need an air horn before one of us is expected to say something.
All right, we'll get the emergency special effect ready to go. Well, with so much coming from Apple this week, I think we'll skip the news and jump straight into it. Alice, what's caught your eye coming from Apple this week?
Well, it's the obvious thing. It's the cameras. The cameras on the new iPhone Pros are amazing. Obviously, people who are used to the Samsung Note 10 Plus or the S10 Plus will be pretty used to having these 3 cameras. But I have both of those phones on me now, and I actually thought the 11 Pro cameras looked better.
That's a really big and very interesting call because it's exactly the area that Apple needed to jump into, given what we've seen out of Samsung, given what we've seen out of Huawei in camera phones. And obviously all I could see this morning was what they showed off at the keynote, and those are always, the very best photos that can be had. So I'm really curious to get a little more detail on where they've really improved, especially considering what they've done has actually kind of existed on the Android side of the fence now for a couple of years.
I think they kind of let the Android side of the fence make the mistakes or make the improvements, so then they could just copy their homework but mix it up enough that no one can tell.
That's the standard Apple playbook, really.
It is. But it looks good. I thought the night photo mode, which I only got to try briefly under a table while a demo person wasn't looking, but it looks good. At these things, it's kind of how much can I get away with before somebody notices what buttons I'm pressing. So I'm looking forward to giving it more of a test run once review units are out. But yeah, I was really impressed, and I was not expecting to be that impressed by an iPhone camera.
I'll be really keen to see how that night mode actually does stack up against its competition, because certainly last year's iPhones really rapidly fell behind what you could do on a range of other phones, including a bunch of other cheaper ones. And I can't imagine you were able to kind of subtly whip one of those out in the Apple demo sessions, because, yeah, I've done those myself, and they're
quite frowned upon. But it was the crazy, mad, hands-on rush. So to set the scene for people who haven't been to one of these kinds of events before, they make all the big announcements, everybody applauds, they turn the light on, and then 300, 500, hundreds of journalists just thunderously race from their seats to a little area behind where there's tables with phones and some very cheerful Apple people who I do not know how they manage to stay that cheerful with that many grumpy journalists trying to do things they're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah, look, I mean, I know what you mean. Journalists are a feral pack, having survived them at IFA as well. It's the same the world round. I guess the interesting thing, though, with them doing, hey, the camera's really good, and I really do hope it is it sort of didn't leave them with an awful lot else to get to really crow about. The underlying processor appears to be great. I'm a little bit dodgy about the benchmark figures they used because they didn't give a lot of detail around those, but I don't entirely doubt them because, frankly, last year's processor was really, really good as well. But beyond that, I can't help but shake the feeling these are just iPhones. They're nice phones, but they're very, very expensive.
Yeah, it's definitely just a spec bump. It feels like an S year. So either they have something amazing planned for next year, or they're starting to run out of ideas.
Is this the
And
first time that they've used the Pro name on iPhones?
it is,
And
yeah.
so what does that actually mean?
It means that people who want to buy the budget iPhone, formerly the iPhone 10R, will now say they've got the full iPhone and then the fancy expensive one is Pro.
So instead of
That's all it
naming
means.
the budget one, they've named the fancy one the fancy one.
It's a great psychological piece of psychological
But
marketing.
that sort of brings it into line because we've had the MacBook Pros for a long time and the MacBooks, and then we got the iPad Pro a while ago as well. So I guess someone who's familiar with the Apple lineup, that kind of makes sense.
There were a couple of things also that were rumored that we didn't see. I mean, there was the rumor that we'd see reverse wireless charging, and that's kind of useless, so it's not really missed. But there was also the suggestion from one of the case makers that we might see a smaller Apple Pencil, which would have made this a much more direct note competitor as well.
I think that was a bit of wishful thinking on behalf of that case maker.
The other flagship feature, of course, that we didn't get, and again, this wasn't entirely a surprise for more monetary reasons than anything else, was 5G. And while I'm sort of on the fence for 5G with Android phones because you pay a premium just to have 5G in there, the Apple phones are actually quite premium priced already. I think in some ways it feels a little rude for them not to have a 5G option.
It does. But is there anybody other than tech journalists and hardcore nerds who really want 5G at the moment? There's no coverage that's worth having.
Look, you're not wrong, and that's sort of the argument I've used with Android phones in the past. But I think when you're talking about phones that stretch up towards $2,500, having it there for a phone that you're going to keep for 3 to 4 years, and that's the kind of figures we're starting to see for a lot of phones, and especially for iPhones, you start to hit that point of, well, I've spent an awful lot of money on this phone. And it doesn't quite do what the networks in 3 to 4 years are absolutely going to be able to do.
Yeah, I can see a lot of people, a lot of nerds skipping this year. I think mums who are up to a phone year probably are just getting the regular iPhone.
Are they going to meet that asking price though?
For the regular iPhone, yeah, I think so. They met it for the XR. The XR was more expensive than the current iPhone. The XR was $12.29 and this one's $11.99.
Yeah, yeah, okay, it's marginal. That one's marginally cheaper. I'm more thinking within the pro space, and especially those higher end ones, especially with the way that a lot of the plans have gone, where Telstra and Vodafone now split them out. It's a pricey little proposition, and I think people are starting to click in on that. I guess what I'm trying to say is I miss the era of them having a genuinely lower cost, SE iPhone. But I guess that's just me.
Yeah, it's gone now. So I miss the era where they actually seemed to be innovating.
What would you have liked to have seen in these iPhones, Alice?
I want the 5G and the USB-C and something that surprised me, something I didn't expect. If I'm paying $2,500 for a phone, I want something that makes me go, ooh.
So it's got to buy you flowers and chocolates?
Yeah, I have a wife to do that. It's got to have a 2-day battery or have a hologram or something. I don't know. But the thing that does sell me on it is the free TV. Not an actual TV, but TV Plus.
That is a good one, and we'll get back to Apple TV Plus in a minute, but that is a nice one, how they've bundled that up. With 5G, did they actually acknowledge 5G? Did they, channel jobs and call 5G a bag of hurt, or did they just pretend it didn't exist?
They ignored the elephant in the room.
Apple does not comment on other networks or speculation.
Or elephants.
That too.
I think the Pro line is going to be bought by the early adopting Apple fans, as the expensive iPhones are every year. These are the people who are going to get a new phone next year. So I don't think it's as much of a thing, but it probably is going to put off people who wanted to buy a phone for 3 or 4 years.
You mentioned battery life there, and I've got to admit, especially just for that regular iPhone 11, I was really disappointed with what they had to say about that because iPhone battery life for years has been pretty woeful. And to come out and say, oh, well, look, the new one's got an hour, up to an hour, sorry. It's not just guaranteed an hour, it's up to an hour, so that could be 1 second more. Up to an hour more than the older model, and then the Pro ones are up to 4 and 5 hours. You know, it's nice that it's better, but gee, they're still really lagging in that regard.
Yeah, though I found that my 10s Max lasts about the same time as my Note Plus does. And the Note Plus is supposed to have a much better battery. But if I use them the same way over the same day,
Which version? This is the Note. This is the Note 10 or the
10 Plus.
Samsung. Admittedly, this year have fallen off a bit of a cliff battery life wise, but that last year's it's weird. Last year's Samsung phones actually have better battery life than this year's phones. But if you look at some of the stuff from Huawei or from Oppo, they're rocketing ahead. They're well ahead of the game there. Admittedly, with a bit of aggressive battery stuff.
Not, like, again, did not outlast my 10s Max by much.
Interesting. I wasn't my experience, but obviously usage can vary as well. Speaking of battery life, the new Apple Watch has exactly the same battery life as the old one, and I find myself with one very small, limited niche exception, not all that excited by the Apple Watch.
Yeah, the things I'm excited about on the Apple Watch are more software. Like, the compass is cool. It'll be helpful for people who want to use maps without their phone, which I suppose happens
Does it have a sextant
sometimes.
in there too? Seems a bit old school.
The thing that I'm most excited about on the watch is the decibel meter. That noise app is exactly the kind of thing I like to nerd out about. I'm always getting my decibel meter app and making sure an area isn't too loud. And I realize as I say this, I am just a bit of a weirdo for that. But it's always something that I check out and that really matters. And so to have the watch be able to do that as a complication on the face and just be able to check it and make sure it's not too loud, that makes me really happy. But I think that's a pretty niche thing to be excited about.
That's okay. We're into niche things here. That's totally our thing.
Sure.
Yeah. I was going to say, whereas my niche thing for it is that international calling idea that they've got, where if you buy the LTE one, even if you don't have like a phone plan in the country that you're landing in or roaming or whatever, if you end up in an emergency, you can call from the watch to the local emergency services. I think that's really interesting. I'd be fascinated to know the number of deals they've had to pull to get that one working. I know international, well, a level of emergency calling is built into most phones, but I think that's a neat little feature. I don't know if I was an owner of a previous gen Apple Watch that had made me buy a new one though.
Yeah, no, that's not really. It's a nice to have, but it's not a selling point. And I think this Apple Watch was a little devoid of selling points. The one thing that I did really like is how much they're pushing the Cycles app. So it was something that was in the US briefings at WWDC. And it's a women's health menstrual cycle app, which tech giants sometimes have, but never talk about. And so I think it's nice that they're putting that front and center and that they're not afraid to talk about periods.
Absolutely. And actually, they talked about the women's health study that they're doing as well before they, in fact, announced the new watch, which I thought was actually, it's a neat angle, and it's actually something they've got well over other wearables, that they've actually got some very good health tracking. Although we're still waiting for the ECG function to be fully permitted here in Australia. You've got to have an American Apple Watch and convince it that you're an American in order for that to function.
Yeah, I think that's more of an Australian regulatory issue. I think Apple would quite like that to function in Australia, but Australian regulators seem to be a little bit more intense than the FDA.
Speaking of things people might buy, the one thing from this launch that I'm actually somewhat tempted to buy, and that was a bit of a surprise, was a new iPad. Just iPad, not an iPad Pro.
Yeah, and that $529 price point for an iPad that can use an Apple Pencil and the keyboard cover is actually a pretty tempting prospect.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the Apple Pencil, and I think the Australian pricing is $649, if I remember correctly. Again, forgive my jet lag if I'm wrong, listeners, but But I've been actually waiting on an upgrade for an iPad, and the Pro has never quite done it for me at its price point. So having this again, it's sort of just a spec bump, but having that flexibility to use their very nice keyboard for folks who like the pencil, being able to do that again, previous gen could do it, but yeah, being able to bring all of that together in a reasonably priced device, I think it's a big plus.
Yeah, and it actually is 529. I just double checked. Like it's in Australia. That's a good price for an iPad that's 10.2 inches.
So for the new iPad, it's actually slightly more expensive than the older iPad, but it is a slightly better device. It doesn't feel exorbitant in terms of price bumps the way some of the other stuff was.
So we talked earlier about Apple TV Plus. So, and I'm thinking, how are they going to get people to pay for yet one more streaming video service? But people won't. Not everyone will have to pay for it.
No, I think it's kind of a gift with purchase that you can also purchase.
That sounds like
Like
Apple. Yeah, makes total sense.
yeah. But also for 7.99 a month, there aren't many shows, but the shows they do have massive creative teams behind them. Like today they announced a show with Jason Momoa about a world in the future where everyone is blind, but then some babies are born who can see, and then somebody's trying to kill them, and that gets very dramatic. That seemed cool. And like you've got Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston and Steve Carell in a show about morning television. It's actually going to be a cool service. It's a lot of what I like to see.
It's coming to Australia in November. Yeah, it's a bit like Disney. We thought that they might make us wait for a bit longer, but we seem to be one of the first countries to get it.
No, they want our money as soon as they can get it.
Apple's spending up big on the big Hollywood names. And call me cynical.
You're
Now,
cynical.
plenty of people have. Thank you. But I'm not entirely convinced of the value relative to a Netflix or a Disney Plus because it's a very, very thin catalogue of shows. They're not particularly going out there and licensing anyone else's content. And I think that's a big reason why they've played this whole card of, hey, by the way, if you buy an Apple product, you'll get a year's worth for free. It's kind of a reverse Amazon play with what they do with Amazon Prime Video.
I think maybe they're giving themselves that year to try and get some rights to some other properties. Maybe they thought they could get rights to other properties and then discovered that the 10,000 billion other streaming services had already bought all the good ones.
Or had started their own streaming service to go with it, like Disney. I mean, if
Yeah.
I was going to pay $7.99 for yet another streaming service in Australia, I'd be giving my money to Amazon before I gave it to Apple, and that's saying a lot because Amazon's streaming service has been the butt of jokes for a long time, but it's actually starting to come good. Then you throw in Disney, then you throw in a couple of others. I think if Apple does come up with one good show, a lot of people will watch it on the BitTorrent channel before they'll give Apple money because they're already given so much money to so many people.
Probably, but I reckon you just wait 10 months for all the episodes to come out, or 6 months of all the episodes of the shows you want to watch. Get a free 1 month trial, watch the show, cancel the trial.
The other thing people seem to do now is they subscribe to things in groups. So, I get Netflix, my brother-in-law gets Stan, my other brother-in-law gets Amazon, and we all swap account logins. There's a bit of that happen at your house as well?
A bit in that I subscribe to everything and then my parents leech off it.
Yeah, that happens in my house as well. There's also talk
Yeah.
that Cook wants to keep all the shows really PG and bland, and that's part of the problem that they're going to struggle to compete against the likes of Netflix when Cook doesn't want anything too adult.
I don't think there's a way to have that CTV show without it being dark. I think there's a way you can tell that story without it being extremely violent. But I think there's a difference between boring and PG. There is a way to tell a story without having everybody get raped and have their arms all the time. That's kind of missing.
Do you think that Game of Thrones has kind of set the bar so high in terms of, people buying the farm in creative ways that maybe everyone expects that now, or that there will be, as you say, maybe a bit of a backlash and we want to go back and see a bit less of that?
I think it goes back to The Sopranos and Spooks. Spooks particularly started the trend of killing a major character on average every 6 episodes. And we've just kind of come to expect that if a show is going to be dark and mean business, then they have to kill all the characters we like to make everyone else sad all the time. instead of trying to find a way to tell a story where people struggle but mean well,
And
I
actually
think there's a
survive to the
way.
end of the season.
Yeah, like we've got this kind of thing that having a likable character is some kind of dirty, lame thing. But writing a character like people want to invite into their homes for an hour a week is much harder than writing a complete asshole. And those are the characters I want to see more. Like I already watched the news. I'm already sad. Give me something to give me faith in humanity or be fascinated by without knowing anyone I get invested in is going to die, so I don't get invested.
And then there's Apple Arcade, and we've known this was coming. We've known what the proposition was. You pay a subscription fee for a set number of games. But here again, I'm a little bit cynical, and I think I'm a little bit cynical because we've already got existing versions of this in terms of subscription services, and those services have kind of hundreds of console quality games. We're talking about essentially mobile quality games because they've got to be able to run on a phone as well as on a Mac or an Apple TV. Did you see anything today that would convince you to part with your hard-earned money for Apple Arcade?
Well, they've got some pretty heavy hitters involved, like Annapurna Interactive, Capcom, Konami, and I reckon they could bring out some good stuff. The only game I actually got to play was Frogger, and I already have access to Crossy Road, but like Frogger was cool. It looked nice. But having 100 games that you can only get in this one service and it only costs you $8 a month, I reckon that'd be really attractive for parents, depending on whether or not they're in-app purchases. If they're in-app purchases, I think it's going to kill it.
I believe the whole prospect is there will never be in-app purchase. I think they've actually said that on record. Again, the jet lag could be making a fool of me. But I wonder about the parents thing purely from the viewpoint that you've given your kid an iOS device already, and there are thousands of quote unquote free games out there. If you don't allow them to do in-app purchase, if you don't enable them on that device, they can just play till they're bored and move on to the next one for no money. I think they're competing against that ecosystem, and so many developers have found it really hard to compete with free. I'm sure the people who got games on Apple Arcade are probably being very nicely recompensed by Apple. But that doesn't mean that Apple can sell that service to people who historically have shown they don't really want to spend any money on games if they can avoid it.
Yeah, but I get sick of the constant ads every 30 seconds and sick of going, oh well, this level is only hard because they want to sell me a hint. I just want a phone game that I can enjoy. And if that costs $8, I am very happy to part with that $8 because it's not just buying one game for $8 and then buy another game the next month. It's if you don't like the game that you're playing right now, there's 99 others that you can try. I reckon that would be really attractive to parents who just don't want to be nagged about their kids for the things that are in the ad or buying an extra 100 gems or a hint or whatever it is. I reckon that's got some value to it.
Sure, it can do. I mean, I suppose Crossy Road, which you mentioned before, is actually not a bad example of a game that got that balance pretty right. You could play an awful lot of that and spend no money whatsoever. And obviously, it did pretty well for Hipster Whale as it was.
Yeah, for sure. Crossy Road found that balance, but I'm playing a lot of new free games every week, and it is so rare to find another Crossy Road that has that balance.
Sure, there's a lot, there's a lot of games that are absolutely brutal with the ads and the IAP. You're not wrong, and I suppose we'll just have to wait and see what comes onto the service and whether or not they get almost that Crossy Road level app. That hey, here's a game that is absolutely compelling and well worth the money. I love me a retro game, as the regular listeners will know, but I'm not sure that Frogger will get me there. Although Sega did announce a new version of Choo Choo Rocket for Apple Arcade, and I'm probably there for that.
Well, that's something. Like, yeah, I think there's going to be something for everyone, but I don't think this is a service for everyone, and I don't think Apple will particularly care if it's not a service for everyone, because enough people are going to sign up.
Well, folks, that's just about it for another fine episode of Vertical Hold. What do you think? Are you keen on Apple's new iPhones or its subscription services? Let us know and send us your feedback via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Alice for joining us all the way from California.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks always to everyone who tuned in on their podcasting platform of choice. I know we keep going on about it, but we really appreciate your shout outs and reviews. We love to hear your thoughts on the show and all your efforts to help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Casa Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market. This week, we're also joined by a new guest, freelance technology journalist Alice Clarke, a regular contributor to the Sydney Morning Herald and other Australian publications. Alice is joining. Did I just call you Alice Clarke?
Totally
You did.
But it's okay.
I thought I was the tired
actually
one.
the same person. It's very hard to tell us apart when you see
Oh
it.
my God.